Hi, Molly Stevens here, one of the hosts of Everything Cookbooks, with a quick announcement about a pitch slam we're hosting with literary agent Sally Dacres on Wednesday, May 21st. What's a pitch slam? Well, it's a fast-paced 90-minute workshop where you can present a brief summary of your cookbook and get immediate feedback from Sally and the 4 Everything Cookbook hosts. If you don't have a book idea to share, you can attend to learn what makes an effective pitch and what agents and publishers are looking for. There's also a general Q&A at the end, so everyone gets a chance to participate. It's the second one of these that we've hosted, and it really is a lot of fun for everyone. Tickets are selling fast, though, so get yours soon by going to our website, everythingcookbooks.com, or email us directly at everythingcookbooks@gmail.com. If you want to stay up to date on announcements like this and more behind the scenes, be sure to subscribe to our Substack newsletter. Hope to see you at the Pitch Slam, and now back to the show.
Many people out there have amazing life stories to tell, but what does it take to turn one of those stories into a memoir? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Kate Leahy, and I'm here with Molly Stevens. Hey, Molly.
Hi, Kate.
So today we're getting into how to write a memoir, and I want to know, has anyone ever told you should write one?
Not seriously. I mean, nobody who has any power to, publish, help me publish it. I've certainly been telling some of my origin story and had someone say, oh, you should write a memoir. But, it's never been anything I've seriously considered. How about you?
Every once in a while, someone says, oh, you have all these interesting stories.
Right.
But they're not a memoir material because they're all disparate. They're not really linked. And also sometimes it's like, well, how personal would I want to get? And that's something that I don't know if I'd want all the real juicy stories out there.
Do you read a lot of memoir?
I don't. That's another thing that I think I would need to read more memoir to know if I have stories that would be memoir worthy.
Yeah, I don't read a lot, but I read a fair amount of memoir. And I think one of the really interesting things to me is like there are certain people who've written 3 or 4 memoirs. So it's not an autobiography. You're not telling your life story, but you're finding a particular aspect of your life and telling the story around it. But no, the answer is no.
No. You could talk about going to France in your early 20s, working there.
Sure. But I mean, there are a couple things. One, you need to have recall of all that information. And,
Sure.
Did you take journals? Do you have notes from them? I mean, I think it's a little bit easier maybe in modern times with emails and text exchanges, perhaps. But the other thing that I think about, once the story is out there, like people in your life who are still in your life or people who were in your life but are still in the world who you may not want. I mean, there's all that.
And once the story's out there, it becomes its own thing. So everyone has heard of Eat, Pray, Love. It certainly has made Elizabeth Gilbert, brought her worldwide fame. It's a story that got so big that it becomes its own thing. And I feel I've heard her speak about how people took that story to mean something completely different, oftentimes than she intended. It became bigger than the actual story she wrote. And then with that, you get people who had no business reading it to begin with, sort of hating on it too. So
right,
you get,
right.
It's a really weird thing to have a specific part of your life out there. People can judge it.
This is Everything Cookbook. So we're not, we didn't shift it over. You didn't tune in to Everything Memoir. Yeah. But we have noticed that a lot of new cookbooks are infusing the pages with personal stories between the recipes. But it's hard to do well, though, because you're juggling what people come to your cookbooks for and also telling some raw truths about your life. We've seen examples of it done well and examples of it not done so well. But I think we're seeing more and more memoir creep into food and cookbook writing.
Right. It's so somebody wants to write a cookbook, but they don't want it to be like just a typical cookbook. They want it to be more. I think that's why today I'm really excited to have someone who's written a memoir on to talk about the realities of writing it and how to do it well. Because even if you're doing a cookbook, but you do want to infuse those life stories, there's things to think about. You actually have to have a story arc. These stories need to mean something. There needs to be a beginning, middle, and an end. And that's something that when you write memoir, you have to do that. It's more like writing a novel than it is about writing, say, narrative nonfiction. Our guest today, Sutanya Dacres, is an author who wrote a memoir about living in Paris, which is a very popular topic, but it's not a memoir about Paris that you've read before. Lauren Collins, the author of One in French, called it an anti-fairytale. So we're going to get into what that means. But Sutanya grew up in New York. She fell in love with a French man that she calls TFM for the French man throughout the memoir. She moves to Paris. She gets married, but she didn't get her happily ever after.
No.
That happens in the midway point of the story.
Instead, Sutanya learned how to love living on her own. She started a podcast, which is how the book came to be in the first place, because the podcast is called Dinner for One, and the memoir also Dinner for One, How Cooking in Paris Saved Me, came out in 2022. And it tells us this story of moving to Paris without speaking French, getting divorced, and finding joy on the other side. Really excited to talk to her.
Let's bring her on to dig into this memoir. So Tanya, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. I'm very excited.
First, we kind of want to just go into what a memoir is. On our podcast, we talk a lot about what it's like to write cookbooks. And a lot of times these days, cookbooks are infusing more personal story and narrative. It's still very different, though, to write a full-length memoir, crafting a story out of your own life. But like for you, like what is memoir? Do you have a specific way to think about it?
For me, it's just taking, sharing, in my case at least, a very specific part of my life. Like I didn't go that much into my childhood and like being born in Jamaica and then moving to New York and growing up there, which I think coming from a big Jamaican family where food and who was cooking what and eating was a central part of just how I was raised and like my education as a human being. And I'm sure I could have weaved that into the story somehow, but it just didn't fit with the overall narrative that I was trying to create. So for me, a memoir is about a specific moment in my life that was quite impactful and really, changed and shifted the trajectory of my life. That's how I view it, at least.
Yeah. In your acknowledgments, you thank your agent, Lee.
Yeah.
For plucking you out of the kitchen. Can you tell us that story?
You know, it's really funny. I remember very specifically, it was January of 2020. And a friend of mine was having her first art show in London, like solo exhibition. And I was there and I remember saying to her, we were smoking a cigarette off her balcony. And I said to her, I really want Dinner for One to get bigger, but I don't know how to do it. Because at the time I just had the podcast.
The podcast, Dinner for One. Yeah.
And I was like, I really want it to get bigger, but I don't know how to do it. And she was like, oh, maybe you should social media, but just give me ideas, which is lovely. And I had to check my email all weekend because I was in London and I was like drinking beers and being cheeky, as they say. And I checked my email like the day after and there was a email from Lee there. And she was kind of like, hey, I listened to you. I found your podcast. I listened to it. I think it's great. Have you thought about writing a book? And I was like, oh, what?
Oh my gosh.
No. And I responded and I said, thank you so much. It's really nice of you, but I have nothing to say. She was like, you literally have a podcast where you talk to yourself. I think you have a lot to say. Maybe she's right. Maybe she's onto something. So we had a few conversations because I was really, it's one of those things of like, be careful what you ask for, right? Because I literally came out of my mouth like less than 48 hours before, like I want to do something bigger. And then it was there and I was so afraid. So I had a few conversations back and forth with Lee and I really liked her. I really took to her. I got a good vibe from her. I thought she was a really good person. I thought she was really trustworthy. And then I said yes, not knowing that a few weeks later, we were going to enter into global shutdown, a pandemic. So it actually happened at the right time because then I was home and I could work on the proposal.
Wow. So how did you figure out the angle of the book? Like it's called Dinner for One, the same name as your podcast, but your podcast is not about the story that brought you to create the podcast. Did you and Lee bat around ideas until you landed on, oh, this is the story I'm going to tell with this anti-fairytale?
Not really. Lee gave me a lot of leeway. She did to just get it all out there. I mean, I think because my podcast is very much about my post-divorce life in Paris and trying to figure that out, I think it just, without even thinking about it, it made sense to give people some context, more deeper context rather, as to why I moved to Paris and also where I was in my life to allow myself to be swept off my feet by this French man who was effectively a stranger and then decide to, do this long distance relationship and then marry him, which is like kind of nuts. I think about it now. I know when I got married, I was 27, right? Like, whoa. And now I'm 39 and I look back and I'm like, both the set of our parents are crazy. Our friends are crazy. Like everyone was just like, this is a great idea, you know? So I think I wanted to give some context to why this story even exists and how it started. I think I unconsciously went into it that way.
The timeline. So 2020, you were making the podcast. Lee heard the podcast, reached out to you. You sat down to write the memoir. How far back did the events happen? How many years had you been living in Paris by then?
At that point, I'd been there for 2020. Oh gosh, but you can't ask writers to do math.
Right.
Sorry.
Writer math.
What I'm getting at, Sutanya, is like to sit down and write a memoir. How far back are you going in your personal history to recreate this time?
Pretty far. I met my now ex-husband in December 2009. So that whole part of the book about me going to Finelli's, that was December 2009. We got married 2013.
Right. So it's a dozen years or so.
Yeah. We broke up 2016. And then so I sat down to write the memoir 2020. But even then I couldn't write it. So this is the apartment I talk about in the book. This is when I shared with my ex-husband. And I couldn't write it here. I actually escaped to Aix-en-Provence to write the first draft because it was too hard for me to do that here. And I found myself, I talk in the book about some bad habits that I guess I fell into in terms of like alcohol and stuff. And I found that when I started writing the first draft, I started falling back onto those habits. And I was like, yeah, girl, it's going to be a no. You're going to have to exit if you want to get this done. So then luckily enough, I had a friend in Aix-en-Provence who had an apartment and she was kind enough and generous enough to let me stay there. So I was there for 3 or 4 months working on the first draft. Yeah, that's how I was able to do it. Otherwise, I think it would have been too hard to dig back into all of that.
Right. It's interesting how when you dig back into it, you also fall back into it's another podcast, but that's really interesting.
Right. And I think that's true because like one thing that people want when they read memoir is a real story. And if everything is sort of like, oh yeah, like I married the wrong guy, but then we broke up, it was fine. Like that's not a story. But to like write the real story, you got to feel those feelings again and revisit those moments. And some of them, you know, you probably never really want to think about again. So I could imagine being in the same place where those moments happened, especially in a time of lockdown, was nutty. So was this something, when you say you're writing this first draft, is this the first draft of the manuscript that now exists, or is this part of the proposal process with Lee?
No, this was the first draft of what is now the manuscript. The proposal I wrote here. I wrote in this apartment. And that was a bit, because it was also, the proposal was, I had to write a sample chapter, which was kind of like the biggest storytelling part of it. Other than that, it was a lot of like, who am I? Like, how would the book be marketed? A chapter summary. So not getting in, it was chapter summaries and then one sample chapter. So it wasn't digging into it. It was very high level. So that was easy for me to do here. But yeah, once I got into the nitty gritty, I was like, gotta get out of Dodge. This is not.
Right. But you were able to sell it, you know, with a proposal, not the full manuscript.
With the proposal, yeah.
So I'm curious. I mean, I know from reading your memoir, I know a little bit about your background, but I don't know about your background as a writer. So you get this book deal to write a memoir. Did you take classes, join a writing group? How'd you learn to write, or did you know how to write?
Well, I am sort of still in some ways a copywriter. So I've always written. And in the acknowledgements, I talk about this English teacher named Mrs. Cordell. And she actually encouraged my parents to also send me to a writing class for a couple months when I was a teenager. And I've always written, and I read all the time. I'm a big reader. I've always written. And, you know, the misguided confidence that I talk about in the book, I still very much embody that. So I was like, yeah, sure. And, you know, Lee is so great. She was definitely a big help as well. Like she definitely helped me fine tune it and make it presentable. And then on the publisher side, I had a great editor, Natalie Halleck. She was there as well to help me frame it and finesse it. And then when she left, actually the executive editor, Erica, came on. So I received a lot of help, and a lot of people generously shared their skills with me. But yeah, a lot of it was I just did it. And that's also part of my personality. I just do it and I figure it out. And I'm not afraid to ask questions. So I ask a lot of questions as well. And I'm not afraid to ask friends who I've written books questions. I'm not afraid to admit I don't know something. And I think that has helped me a lot in my life so far. So I've also asked my friends, like one of my really good friends, Lauren Collins, she's a staff writer for the New Yorker, and she looked over the first draft for me, and gave me her tips and, some of the things I did change based on her feedback, and some things I was like, actually this sounds more like my voice. I'm going to keep it in. So I think a little bit of me, a little bit of my community.
Yeah. No, because it's very writerly. I mean, it's really got a lot of voice, and that's not something that someone who's never, considered themselves a writer can usually pull off. So.
Right. But it's also important to get that feedback from somebody else who you can trust on the writer level, because they will say like, okay, it's getting a little slow here. If you pass it on to a friend, they're like, oh yeah, this is great writing. But it's like a writer will say, okay, why do we need this story here? Or what happens if you move the story later or earlier? And it's like, oh, and then sometimes that's a light bulb moment, or else you're like, no, actually the story needs to be right where it is. And that's also kind of validation, because then you're trusting your own gut. One
of the things Kate and I were talking about, like, it's not autobiography. It has to, there's a narrative arc, but it moves around. And, the writer, Rebecca Solnit, has got this wonderful quote that I love. It says, trying to decide where to start is like dipping a cup in the ocean.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So, I mean, your story starts, you're already divorced when the story, I'm not giving any spoilers, it's the first page,
the prologue, right?
It's the prologue. It starts, well, we already know this is not going to be the fairy tale ending. So how did you figure out where to start your story?
Well, to be honest, that was with the help of my original editor, Natalie, because that specific bit was in another part of the book. And she said, we need to bring it to the forefront because that's really interesting. She's like, I really love the way you wrote it and all the things that I like to hear.
We all like to hear them.
Right.
We all like to hear them.
This is so fantastic. Oh my God. And yeah, she's the one who suggested that we make it the prologue.
Mm-hmm. I could see that really making sense from an editor perspective, because you want to make sure readers are getting into the book for the right reason. And if they think they're going in for like, oh, happily ever after, and then halfway through, they're like, oh, so just tell it up front. Like, and it also kind of gives you suspense, because the marriage isn't going to work out, but you don't know how or why. It was an effective way to start. And then you can start off in the earlier chapters, building up that relationship.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk a little bit about just how you craft that narrative arc. You know your personal story, and you've already kind of figured out this isn't going to go back to my childhood. This is really going to be about this pivotal moment where you meet this man randomly in a bar in New York, and then have this email correspondence for a while, and then you end up eventually going to Paris, getting married. How did you figure out the story arc?
This is, again, it goes back to what you say about having other writers, your editor. I don't know how anyone would ever write a book without an editor, because I was so deep in it, right? Like if it wasn't for my editor saying, take this out, take this out, take this out, it would have taken me a much longer time, I think, to get to that place. The only thing that I was very adamant about was not going too far into my past, my childhood, any of that stuff. Not because it's not interesting. It's very interesting. It's another book. But I really wanted to set the stage and paint this picture of a woman in her early 20s that it's kind of like a sliding doors moment, right? Mm-hmm. Had I stayed in New York and not given this French man the time of day, first of all, I wouldn't be writing the book, and and then this would have happened. And I really wanted to paint the picture and create this narrative arc of this like 20-something who didn't know that she was not taking the path of least resistance. You know what I mean? I think that's what it came down to, essentially. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I think I wanted to paint that picture and use that as my narrative arc. Like, I could have definitely had a little pen pal thing with this French guy and then be like, all right, whatever, bye. But for some reason, I don't know, that 20-something decided that she wanted to explore and not take the path of least resistance and see what was out there for her.
Yeah. In the book, you call him TFM, the Frenchman.
Yes.
That's the bigger question of using people in your real life in the story, in the memoir. How does a memoirist deal with that?
A lot of the people in the book, they had like very kind of common names like Emma, like Lauren, I didn't really talk about them in any ways that were where you could figure out who these people are. Mm-hmm. That was okay. There were a few of my friends, like my friend Samar that I talk about that I'm still very good friends with today. I double checked with her to make sure it was okay that I used her name. But also I think they knew that it was about me and I wouldn't involve them that much. So no one actually pushed back, which was quite nice. The only thing I did have to ask TFM, he'd had to read it actually.
Oh.
He's one of the first people to read it because I use his text messages and his emails. Like they're literally copy paste. And those are his words. So we had to get permission from him.
How did that go?
It was, it's funny. This is the first time I'm actually sharing this. He actually got quite emotional and like teared up a little bit. And I was like, well, shouldn't have broke up with me.
Yeah, that's, God, there's so many layers there.
Yeah.
That's something that I think a lot of times when people set out to write a book, you wouldn't even think that, oh, I've got to run this by the person who was sort of this catalyst.
Yeah. But no, he liked it. He thought it was, very well written. He liked the way he was portrayed. And I mean, he gave me the okay. So yeah, he was fine with it.
That's great. People surprise you.
We were talking about having those emails as a resource.
Oh yeah. That was when I realized I needed to leave to go to Aix-en-Provence. Because I hadn't looked at these emails in years.
Right.
And these date back to 2000. We started emailing each other. So we met December 2009 and we started emailing each other. I think it was January, February 2010. So I have a history of our entire relationship going from this kind of like weird emailing to like pen pal to like flirting to then when we were actually like dating. And that was our main correspondence, that and like GChat. That's how old I am. I remember GChat. Yeah. So I have all of that and photos and things like that. And so, going through that was really difficult because I hadn't looked at that, essentially since 2013 when I moved here, because then we were together, all that stuff. It was, I always say that if we had stayed together, had kids and, all those things, it would have been a lovely thing for our kids to see, and grandkids to see if we had any, but alas, c'est comme ça, c'est la vie.
I could see just the need to get to a neutral space to really think these things through.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about like some of the words and some of the scenes in the book itself. In the middle of the book, you talk about like your cafe loafing. You kind of are studying people in cafes. You're trying to figure out what it means to be a Parisian. And it seems like these are just like key activities like all good writers should like eavesdrop and observe people and like pick up details. How did you kind of like know where to pull some of these details from?
I've been an avid journaler, I feel like since before I could even write. I've always been scribbling. And my mom also tells a story of like when I was really little, my younger sister, I would like pretend to read to her. I can read.
It's awesome.
I've been an avid journaler and I still am today. And so I host a monthly supper club out of my apartment. And I started in 2022. And literally after every dinner, no matter how pompette I am, pompette means tipsy in French. No matter how pompette I am, I always manage to scribble down a few words. Or now I leave a voice note and then I transcribe it when I'm a little bit more, with it. But I find I really like people. I know a lot of people, they think it makes them interesting or cool to be like, I hate people. I need to be alone. I don't. I love people. I really do. I find people extremely fascinating. I feel like there's a breadth of like work within people that inspire me. I think that people are extremely funny. Like people are funny. They may not know it, but they're funny. People are funny. They're interesting. They're alive. You can learn so much and everyone has such a unique story, right? So I really like observing people. I like being around people. I'm very much like a people person. And everything was so new to me and so exciting. It just came natural to me to be at the cafe all day and then come home and write about it. And then also when I would have my catch-ups with my girlfriends, I had great like fodder. You know what I mean? I had great stuff to tell them.
Right. Because if you write it down, you remember it a little bit more too. Right.
Yeah. And I'd be like, oh my God, there was this one guy that did, let me look. I remember it was like this week, let me look at my journal. I go grab it and like tell them. But yeah, I think it's just because I really like people. I really do. I think people are great.
And so when you decided you were going to write a memoir, you have not only the email and text exchange with your ex-husband, but also you've got journal entries from, There's this pivotal moment in, the middle of the book. You're out and you have Normandy mussels.
Oh my God, yeah.
You're kind of not sure to order. You're a woman alone in a bar and this charming waiter says, it's a beautiful day sort of thing. And it just feels like this. It reminded me of the Julia Child Sol Meunier, where she says it was the most exciting meal of her life. It was one of her first meals in Paris. Now, this wasn't one of your first meals, but it was one of the first meals where you no longer miss New York City.
Yeah.
You were coming out of the sadness around the failed fairy tale ending. So in writing that, was that intended to be this pivotal moment that it felt like is it for a reader?
A little bit. Was I already? Yeah, I wasn't divorced at that point.
Oh, okay.
You were still, I think it was before you were working.
This was no, this was like the honeymoon. This was the honeymoon. I was just like, oh my God, Paris is so great, and the wine and the people and the this and the cheese. I was very much in my like, this was, I think I call this like my, oh my God, I can't believe I live in Paris foods. I think that's how I refer to them, like mussels. And yeah, I think it was also like I talked about pastries a lot and the pastries there. I mean, like French people, I don't know how they're so good at pastries. And I think it's a part of their like, French people are very much about like pleasure and indulgence. And I think that's where it comes from. I was very much, oh my God, I can't believe I live here and I love it. And I get to eat like this and it's not expensive. And it's expected that I eat like this. And no one bats an eye that I'm drinking wine at like 2:00 in the afternoon or 1:00 in the afternoon. And if I have another glass of wine, that's expected as well, and it's a Tuesday. I think it was without even realizing it at the time. And even, I guess even when I was writing it and now that I am thinking about it, I think it was setting the stage for the life I am leading in Paris now, which is one of heavy indulgence in loving myself and doing things that bring me a lot of joy and pleasure in my life and not allowing anything less than that.
It's juxtaposed with later in the story when things are going south with your relationship. You have these scenes that have a lot of layers to them. And it's not just a story about divorce and the challenges of living in Paris and how, Instagram is not always telling the truth about how fabulous everything is. But then you also, race plays an important role. The Frenchman he's white, he's Jewish. You're not, you're American, but you're Black. And there's this scene where you go to this terrible hair salon.
Yeah.
And you're just in tears.
Almost every woman I've ever spoken to about the book, about my story, they all talk about this scene. Yeah, it was terrible. It was horrible. It took me years to be able to go to a French hairdresser again. Luckily, I found one and I really like her. But yeah, it was really traumatizing.
Right. And the thing is, your husband didn't understand. When you were writing that scene, how did you do it? And was it put in a place where you were kind of like to the readers, like there's just no coming back from?
It wasn't, there was no coming back. I think it was just, these are the cracks. I think the title of that chapter is called "The Masquerade's Over" or something. Yeah, that's when I saw the cracks and I was like, wait, this might be bigger than the both of us. There are a lot of unspoken differences that we, being as young as we were, that we didn't expect or we didn't have the language to talk about. And I think that was for me the beginning of realizing, okay, because I think after that is when we started going to therapy, if I remember correctly. I tried at least to be like, hey, let's put this back together little by little. And that's also when I had to admit to myself that like there were a lot of things, when it came to race at least, that were made me uncomfortable. Like I mentioned in the book, the fact that he didn't really have any Black friends. I was like, that's kind of weird. I have a very multicultural group of friends, and that was in New York. And that also transferred to when I came to Paris and I was making friends. Why is that? And yeah, just not having the language to talk about that. Whereas I think today, if I were to be in a relationship with someone who wasn't a person of color and they didn't have any Black friends, that was something I would ask, and not in an accusatory way, just be like, is it a like proximity thing? Like, is it a work? Is it a school thing? Like, what's going on? Because I can't be your only point of reference in terms of having a relationship with someone who's non-white.
There's also the language.
Yeah, the language. And that there's that scene that I write about with his sister and his sister's boyfriend's parents and my French. And it was just, I think about it now and I wish I was nicer to myself back then, because it was a big move, right. Moving, marrying, new language, starting all over again. And for a long time, I didn't view it as starting all over again, but I did. I 100% did. I left everything that I knew and literally had to learn a new language and learn how to survive in a new culture and learn the cultural nuances and learn the colloquialisms and learn. When I was already an adult, I had to like be reborn in some ways, right. And which was ultimately the end of the book. But I wish I was nicer to myself a little bit.
Yeah. I'm so impressed with the process of looking back over those years, and yes, your editors helped, but I'm sure you didn't give them a 700, or it would have had to be 2,000 pages to really tell the story. And today I did this. So you to choose those, like the hair salon and the mussels and these, the dinner with the sister, the tarte tatin, these moments. And I think to me, that's really where a memoirist needs to focus, is like, how are we going to find elements of real life that have these multi-layers to tell the story? And it's a feat.
It is a feat. Actually, how did you deal with time? Because a lot of time passes. I mean, it's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of a life, but it wasn't like a week in your life. Was time management an issue?
No, not really. I think because, what really helped with the proposal was these chapter summaries. It's like I had the one sample chapter, which was chapter 13, I want to say. It's the one where I really get into like how bad the partying was, where the scene where like I'm going into the office and the colleague thinks I'm like pregnant or something. And I'm like, whoa. So that was a sample chapter, but the summaries helped. The summaries helped a lot in terms of keeping me on track and only including stories and making sure the timeline pushed the story forward to the ultimate crescendo, which is me, the podcast, and cooking for myself and all that stuff. So the chapter summaries definitely help. And that, you can kind of view the chapter summaries as an outline, right? Mm-hmm. It's a very detailed outline. And as a Virgo, I thrive on outlines and lists and structure.
Actually, let me go back to your publishing path. So you have this proposal and you have the sample chapter and you have this outline. What kind of feedback were you getting from publishers?
There were some rejections, and that's fine. We sent out to quite a few. And I had a couple of phone calls, which was really lovely. We had a few rejections and then, a few yeses. And then ultimately went to Park Row, which is part of HarperCollins. But it's so funny because during the calls, I was actually, so the ban, the like travel ban and stay-at-home ban had been lifted because the French people would have freaking like had a revolution 2.0 if they could not go on vacation. The ban was lifted. So me and a couple of friends, we rented this beautiful house in the south of France, in Provence. And so I'm having these calls and my friends are like walking around bikinis. And I remember also one call and the editor was like, did someone just walk behind? Where are you? And I was like, I'm in the south of France. She was like, I don't talk about your book anymore. What is your life?
What is going on?
Doing? And I'm like, so, we're just like someone's on the grill and, we're making some spritzes and it's just a bunch of us friends. I think there was a lot of interest. The publishers that got it, for lack of a better term, they understood how unique my story was in the sense of when we hear about Americans in Paris, it is always the fairy tale, right? It is always the Emily in Paris. It is the like, oh my God, and Guillaume, and he's so handsome, and we live in the sixth, and we have 3 kids, and they read Jacquardy and Monoprix, and you just bought a house in Dijon. Wow, and I eat croissants, and I don't work, and I'm a size 6. And it's just like, great, that's fantastic. And I'm sure a lot of women have that life, but like, what about the women that either move here for love or not, or just move here on their own and their life isn't this fairy tale? Like we have a story to tell too, right? I think they saw that there was room in the American in Paris kind of like tome of books to share a different perspective and narrative. And then also I'm a Black woman. And also when a lot of people think of Americans in Paris, they don't think a Black woman, right? A Black woman in Paris doing her thing, a Black woman married to a French man, like, what? Whoa, hold the brakes. And I did all that. So I think they saw that there was a room for that.
And you didn't come home when it didn't work out. I mean, that's another story.
Now I'm in too deep.
Right. Well, actually, let's get into that. So the book ends on a high note. We've been talking about this, anti-fairytale, but it ends on a high note. So tell us about what really made you think of starting your podcast Dinner for One, the one that ended up getting you the agent and the book deal.
I talk about it towards the end. I think the name of that chapter is the next episode. I was looking for blogs, anything from other American women. And, it didn't necessarily have to be Black, but like just an American woman who moved here for love. And it didn't work out. And I couldn't find anything. All I was finding was, like my beautiful, perfect life. And I was just like, I know I'm not the only one. At the time, I had a friend who was also American going through a divorce from her French husband. I had another one who was like on the edge. They eventually broke up. So I knew I wasn't the only one. And I was just like, why is no one talking about this? And also I wasn't the only woman in the world who was going through a divorce. and could already in some way see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like no happy marriage ever ended in divorce, right? So I just wanted to also somehow in my own way convince myself, right? Because I was still going through it hardcore at the time, but convince myself and also talk to other people or talk at them rather, that this is another lease on life. It's not the end. There's more to you than this. This isn't going to define who you are for the rest of your life. And it's not necessarily a failure. It's the beginning of something else. And no one was talking about that. So I opened my big New York mouth and I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Yeah. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I do want to just quick touch on the recipes in the book. Like not every food memoir has recipes, but it's a good third of the book, 80 pages of recipes. And I'm wondering if that was your decision? Was that in there all the time?
It was in there all the time. It was a part of the proposal because the book came after the podcast, and the podcast, you can literally hear me.
You're cooking
wine and making a mess in my kitchen and forgetting things and, whatever. It just made sense. Yeah. And the recipes, a lot of them are things that I've cooked on the podcast. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are from restaurants that I've loved, that I used to go to. The testing part was really interesting because I asked 2 friends of mine who are really great amateur home cooks to test them. And they were so harsh with me. I was like, guys, what do you mean it doesn't taste good? I got to go back to the drawing board.
That's
oh
funny.
My gosh. Listening to your podcast, I'm a fan of Hattie Crisell, and you had her on to make pancakes. She has a podcast that called In Writing. That's great.
Hattie's a very, very good friend of mine.
Oh, because you had so many great people on.
I'm really lucky in that sense. I thought about that. I did an episode in French recently. And in the introduction, I talk about how lucky I am to have this collection, the voices of these people in my life in Paris that mean so much to me and have helped me. I have their voices. I have an archive of them, and how special that is and how grateful I am to have this.
Yeah. Well, you make your own luck.
I guess so. Yeah. One thing about us Americans, though, we are hustlers. we are always trying to do the thing and get it done. And I noticed that, how can I say this without, if anyone French listens to this, we go for things, Americans, and we try things out, even when we don't have a plan, and we put ourselves out there. And that is one of the things I really appreciate about growing up in the States, going to school in the US. Our misguided confidence can get us into a lot of trouble, but it can also bring us a lot of great unexpected things in our lives, I think. Because we just try. We're like, why not?
Well, it's like you making the tarte tatin for your mother-in-law. I read that. I was like, oh my gosh, you took out a tarte tatin. It was just
not the easiest.
And you're like, it wasn't the best, but it was good.
Kind of like the residencies and pop-ups I've been doing. It's the same thing.
Yeah, tell us about those.
So I started the podcast 2018, cooking in my kitchen. Cool, whatever, yada, yada, yada. Started getting better, but whatever. And then in 2022, before the book came out, I started a supper club called Dinner for One Supper Club. And it is a monthly dinner where single women come to my place to feast on our fabulous lives. I make a cocktail, little apéro snacks, a meal, dessert, whatever. And it's just to celebrate single women, because I feel like even though the stigma around being single is decreasing, I still do think there is this, once you're a woman of a certain age, it's like, oh my God, why haven't you met anyone? What's happening? And that's kind of like the highlight, or that's what people think about when they think about you, not all your accomplishments, not all your achievements, not everything, not the cool, amazing life you're living. So I just felt like single women deserve to be celebrated as well. And also when you're single, you have to think about everything by yourself, right? What you're going to eat, from where you're going to order. And this is a night where they just come over, they just bring a bottle of wine, and they have to worry about anything except having a good time. So I started doing that, which is really fun. And then in 2023, so I do it once a month during the calendar school year, so September to June, because summer's hard, people are traveling, I'm traveling. So then was doing that. It was really fun, really loving it. I was pushing myself more and more, getting better and better. And then in 2023 was my 10-year anniversary. And I was like, well, I want to do something special, because I could just have drinks, on the Seine or in a park, whatever, with friends, but I want to do something.
Your 10-year anniversary of living in Paris.
Yeah, 10-year anniversary of living in Paris. And I was like, oh, what if I do a pop-up at a restaurant? And one of my friends is good friends with one of the owners of a very trendy wine bar here. I just went there one day and I was like, hey, I'm Sutanya. I do this. I do these supper clubs. My friend was like, yeah, she's a good cook. I can vouch for her. And they were like, all right. I did not expect them to say okay. When they said okay, I was like, wait, what? I'm so I've never worked in a restaurant ever.
Wow.
So when I was prepping, I was fine because I used to prepping for supper club and blah, blah, blah. And the chef, their normal chef was there helping me. So that was fine. When service started, the tickets started coming out. I'd never seen a ticket before.
Oh, wow.
So I looked at the owner. I was like, what's this? He was
Wow.
like, those are your orders. And he saw the look on my face. He was like, don't cry now. Let's go. It's like, ah!
Oh my God.
How many people came?
Line around the corner.
Wow.
The owner came up to me. He was like, who are you? I was like, I'm Sutanya. He was like, are you famous or something? Like, what's going on? I was like, well, I told you I have this podcast and then the book and the supper club. He was like, what the hell is going on? I was not prepared for this. So I did 2 pop-ups there, which was really lovely. I did an internship in a French restaurant, a stage in a French restaurant, which was very interesting. And I learned a lot about organization, like how to set up your station, and a lot about running a kitchen, and a lot about ticketing and like sending out orders and things like that. It was very, very beneficial in that sense. And then I did a couple more pop-ups around the city. And again, the misguided confidence. I was like, meh, what's the worst that could happen? It doesn't work out, but at least I tried.
So what are your plans to do with these sort of experiences? Is there a book 2 in the works? Is there something else?
I would love to have a second book going on. That would be great. I'm not going to deny that. I'm open. If anyone's listening and wants to give me a book deal. I don't know. I definitely want to take Supper Club on the road. I think it'll be fun to do like Supper Club London, Dinner for One Supper Club Rome. I mean, there are single women all over the world, right? And what's been great about Supper Club is it's sort of become its own social club because women are like swapping apartments, because I've had women that live in other parts of the world have come, and I've had people like switch apartments, like had people have gotten jobs through the other guests. So it's become a bit of a very exclusive social club because you have to be single to come. And my married girlfriends or my friends in relationships, they're like, can I? I'm like, no, have dinner with your husband and leave us alone. We don't want any part of you, like you already have so many advantages. You have someone who like splits the bill with you, like helps pay your mortgage or rent, like does this, like leave us alone with our thing.
So I'm imagining I'm a single woman. I'm a member of your club and I start dating someone. It's going okay, but it's not great. But I'm like, you know what? He's not, or she's not worth it. I'm not doing it.
Right.
Literally, like I've had people like write back to me and they're like, okay, I broke up with him for whatever, not because of Supper Club, but like I broke up. Can I come back? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Come back.
Right. I mean, I'm not saying it's disincentivizing people finding partners, but it's making you not settle.
Right.
I've got my girls. Yeah, I love it.
And the thing is, if you once a member of Supper Club, you're always a member of Supper Club, right? So I have once a year, I have these big gatherings where like all the women from all the different seasons come and have drinks and eat and whatever. And
even if they have partners by then, they can
even
come.
if you have a partner now, even if you have a baby, whatever, wherever life is taking you, you can come to the gathering once a year. But yes, I would love to take Supper Club on the road. I would also, it would be great for me to do a pop-up in New York. It's like the prodigal daughter returns home,
Right.
But I really don't have a plan per se. I just really love the way cooking makes me feel. The way cooking for myself makes me feel, and the way cooking for other people makes me feel. And I just want to lean into that. It makes me feel really good. It's a way of creating community. It's a way of showing people that you care. It's a way of showing people that you matter. It's a really generous way of giving yourself to other people and myself. It's just a nice thing to do for someone. And I feel like we need more niceness in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just love it. It's really cool.
I love that.
Before we let you go, if I'm someone listening to this episode and I have this burning idea for a memoir, what should I know before I dive in?
I think a memoir can be daunting because you feel like you have to tell everything. You have to like unpack all the trauma and like put it out there. And of course, the more of yourself that you share, and especially like the murky shit, the deep, dark stuff, that's what people want because everyone's nosy. It's numero uno nosy. So that's what's getting people interested, right? And that's what's gonna, maybe create a buzz. But I think it's important to remember that you have to keep something for yourself. You have to keep a sense of privacy. People are only going to know what you tell them. There are so many things about my divorce and my marriage that maybe I kind of hinted to, but I didn't go into detail about to respect my privacy and the privacy of my ex-husband and the privacy of what was our marriage. I think anyone writing a memoir needs to remember that, because especially now with like TikTok and Instagram, everyone has a story time and everyone's like, and then he did this, and then she said that. And then once it's out there, it's no longer yours, right? And then people are going to interpret it any way they want, and they're going to have this idea of who you are and what you're about. So I would definitely, the one thing I would say is keep some of yourself and your story and your privacy for you, and that about you, about your friends, about your family, because once it's done, you can't take it back. Once it's published and it's in black and white, there is no taking it back. And there are ways that you can be vulnerable and honest and share a lot without making it feel like someone's reading your journal, your most intimate journal, and just keep a bit of yourself for yourself. And for the people who know you in real life, and for your therapist. So they're there for.
Right. That's what they're there for.
It's great advice.
That's really, really wise because, yeah, you're right. Once it's out there, you can't take it back and it's in print. Sutanya, thank you so much for coming on Everything Cookbooks. Thank you for this amazing conversation.
Thank you so much for this. It was such fun to talk to you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to today's show. If you have a question, a comment, or a guest suggestion, contact us at everythingcookbooks.com. We rely on listener support, and here are ways to help. Subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Subscribe on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen, and leave us a 5-star rating and a review. You can order books mentioned on the show through our affiliate page at bookshop.org. You can shop our t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other great merch, or buy us a round of coffee, and reach out about advertising on the show or becoming a sponsor. Thanks, as always, to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.